Hello everyone, Eric from Dead Tech here, and I am doing yet another edition of the Reader Question Roundup. That's right, we're going to keep plugging away. Is that a good turn of phrase? I'm not sure I like that. I'm sticking with it. We're going to keep plugging away with the reader questions. I'm having a good time with it. A lot of you are writing in. It's kind of gaining some traction, so let's keep doing it. So, what am I going to talk about today? Recommendations for attorney and CPA and other things. Expanding on topics and becoming a management consultant. What to do if you want to consult but really enjoy program, and how do I move into proper consulting? As you can see, there was a theme in this particular order of questions. I believe they all came as the result of a post or two I did about becoming a consultant. So let's look at and tackle those. And if that sounds interesting, stay tuned. All right. First question. Let me pop it up over here in Trello. Eric, I was inspired by developer hegemony. Thank you. I am exploring forming an independent IT consulting practice and was wondering if you have any recommendations for finding CPAs or attorneys that are well suited to support such an organization. Oh, by the way, I see that you spent some time in Austin. I'm glad you enjoyed the tacos and your stay there. It's a great city. It is a great city. For those of you that don't know, my wife and I do a lot of slow traveling throughout the colder months when we're in Michigan now, but there are other times of year when Michigan isn't great. You know, kind of like October through May. So we go south, and one of the places we spent some time in the last year was Austin. Great tacos. Anyway, the question at hand, recommendations for finding CPAs and or attorneys that are well suited to support an IT consulting practice. So what I'll say to this is that I unfortunately don't really off the top of my head. And I feel sort of bad for that, because one of the things I talked about in developer hegemony is that I could see a future where as there are more of these kind of like gig economy based software app dev shops, things like that emerging, that you'll see firms that cater to them also emerge, which I have seen. But the trouble is, personally, I don't know about those because I've been all set on accounting and legal representation for quite a number of years, so I haven't really been in a position where I need to look around. That doesn't mean that I don't have advice. It just means that I don't have like a number or a website to give you per se. I could always, I guess, refer to the different folks that I use, although attorney is kind of vague. So I've had relationships with intellectual property attorney, a realtor, but that's not for business, contract attorney. So like different, one kind of catch-all attorney might on a long time frame not be what you need, unless you get big enough that you need like a general counsel. So it's sort of hard for me to give specific advice there, but here's what I'll say to this. I cannot overstate how much I think you ought to find this sort of help via word of mouth. And specifically, I think you should find it via word of mouth among people that are doing a similar kind of thing. So this is a bit of a meta recommendation, I guess, but go and see if you can get into like a Slack or a group or something that contains similar consultants and professionals doing similar kinds of things. And that is really the best place to get recommendations for, CPAs, attorneys, or anything else you might want, tax prep people, or any other vendor that you can think of. So I'm sorry I can't really give more specific advice, but hopefully that general advice gives a good framework for how to go about finding someone. All right, let's look at question 2, which I've got up over here. After reading your post on becoming a management consultant, I am wondering if you have useful resources for tackling 3 of the areas you encourage learning about. And then the list of those is business organization structures, leadership, problem discovery and solving, and meaningful interviews. I'm going to see if I can rustle up the blog post that prompted this in the description down below, so I'll link off to that. But basically, I had given some advice for things that if you want to get into management consulting, here's the type of stuff that you ought to know. And I do generally stand by that advice, but as I think about it and how to recommend things in response to this question, I actually think I answered the person who asked this directly via email, but I don't know of a ton of stuff like this, and this is not how I actually learned about the ropes of management consulting. So, for instance, one of the pieces of advice that I remember offering in this post was that you should go study up on org structures, like a matrix type organization.
Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it.
A hierarchical organization, go learn about the Spotify model, different ways that you might organize a department, and a number of other things that if you're kind of coming to do management consulting or IT management consulting, what I did, that you should be able to speak about intelligently. And I stand by that, but as I think about a piece of advice to give, the thing that I wouldn't recommend doing if you're looking to transition into advising people in leadership roles in IT, I don't think I would go out and approach this as if you were taking a boot camp or like getting a degree where you learn all this kind of background theory. It's not that you couldn't do it this way, but the most difficult part of getting into having these folks as your buyers, and we're going to talk more about this in subsequent questions, but it's kind of getting those relationships and establishing a rapport with them and getting a foot in the door. And going off and studying and reading books about org charts and how to do interviews and so on and so forth isn't going to make you any progress. It will build up a lot of theoretical knowledge, but you'll still kind of be at square one with that. So what I think I would actually recommend in response to learning about this stuff is to think about it a little differently. You can Google this stuff, and maybe just start Googling like different org charts and start reading up on it. Do that as much as you can take. It'll give you helpful background. And I would have that in your back pocket as your management consulting progresses. But I'd also recommend kind of learning it on a more as needed basis as you go and really focus on getting a foot in the door. And what that involves is finding a specific area of expertise where you can advise management and building those relationships, and then they'll start asking you about more and more stuff. Now, to make this more concrete, I'm going to give a hypothetical example, kind of using my specialty before I started and ran the content business, which was like a specific kind of static analysis, like helping organizational leaders make decisions about code bases. Let's say I was just trying to get a foot in the door there, and I were trying to obtain relationships with buyers and management. I might advertise myself as, hey, if you're facing a decision as to whether to retire a code base or whether to evolve it, I can help with that. And that's speaking to the kind of person that will ultimately pull the trigger on that, which is a CIO or what have you. Now, once I'm talking to that person, I'm going to have a relationship. I'm going to be trusted as an expert in code bases and for advising in and around code bases. But what you'll find happens over the course of time is while you're here, Mr. or Mrs. Consultant, I would like your opinion on other things. So it might be something, very closely related, like, hey, you've helped me make a decision about this one code base. What about this other one I've got? Or they may just assume that you're kind of an expert in general at all things IT strategy. And they may ask you, like, what do you think of my org chart? That's usually going to be a bridge too far, but it might happen. And that's kind of how I'd go about doing this. So I'd approach this in twofold fashion. Do a little bit of reading up on kind of the life of management, the decisions they make, different org chart structures, how to vet talent, and so on and so forth. Give yourself kind of like surface knowledge of that. Read case studies is the best way I think you can go about learning that. Like, what are the different org charts at different places? Do all that, kind of acquire that knowledge. Don't spend a ton of time on this, though, because you're not earning a degree. Instead, focus on getting in front of these people, and then, don't lie to them or anything. So if you're there because of your specialized code base knowledge and they say, hey, what do you recommend for my org chart? And you don't really know, don't make things up. Take that as a cue that people who want to know about code bases also want to know about org charts, and go learn that more on demand. That more closely mimics the way I sort of wound up giving a lot of advice. And I think it's more pragmatic, and it won't result in a lot of speculative learning about stuff that might bore you to tears that you're just learning because you think it might come in handy. So anyway, that's my advice on that. I don't really have a lot of specifics in the way of resources because, frankly, that isn't how I learned about it. All right, moving right along to question 3. This one is a little bit longer. Hi, Eric. I recently came across a blog post of yours via Hacker News, and I've really been enjoying many of your posts. Thank you. After reading your article, The Key to Becoming a Software Consultant, I will link that in the description as well. I was left with one major question. What do you think someone like me should do if they actually really enjoy programming? At the moment, I definitely fall closer to the plumber category that you mentioned. While in many ways I'd like to move past that, I don't really want to stop writing code altogether. I feel you suggest in the article that it's hard to find a middle ground between being a consultant in the sense that you mentioned and being a plumber. I'll explain this in a minute. While I'm not all that experienced, I've been lucky enough to get onto a project in a consultant and contractor role. Consultant and contractor aren't the same thing, dear reader. In a consultant/contractor role with only a couple of other contributors that I think has some potential, and I've been able to contribute ideas that I think will have significant impact on the direction of the project. Do you think that's more possible on really small projects and less feasible as I move to doing work at bigger organizations? And do you have any other thoughts on what I do if I want to move towards consulting while still getting to write some code? Okay, kind of a lot of ground to cover here. Let me kind of pull back. First of all, I mentioned I don't think consultant and contractor are the same thing. To recap, and I've talked about this in other videos on this channel, but a contractor is usually in the app dev. This is kind of somebody who, you give them specs and they spit out code. It's a labor type position. Consultant, on the other hand, is a role in which you're paid for your knowledge or expertise. Basically, people ask you for advice and they pay you for that advice when you're a consultant. So contractor and consultant aren't the same thing. You can't just put a slash in between those. And the post that he's talking about, the blog post, one of my theses that I have is organizational leadership doesn't look at software developers and consultants as being even remotely the same thing. Software developers are laborers and consultants are people that offer advice. And it is really, really hard because of this motif of software development as labor more than knowledge work or expertise. It's really tough to kind of occupy both those worlds and to be there, cranking out Jira tickets and then to turn around and say, hey, while I'm doing that, I have some thoughts on how you should run this department. Nobody listens to you.
I don't know, it's just my whole life I've been trying to talk. I mean, really talk. But no one wants to listen to me. You know that feeling? They just look at you. They just
Let's
really...
go right now.
So I wrote a blog post saying, if you really want to become an actual consultant, not a contractor or software developer, that you should refuse to let people pay you to write code. And I've talked about this in another video. It's not so much that I'm giving everyone that specific piece of advice. Don't ever let anyone pay you to write code. But if what you're really trying to do is establish yourself as an authoritative consultant, you will never do that if the people you're trying to get that consulting business from are also paying you to write code. They will just view you as a laborer. So against that backdrop, let me answer this question. Can you write code and also be a consultant? Sure. But the first thing I would do is say, which of these is more important to you? If you are really wanting to be a programmer, there is nothing wrong with that. You can earn a living that way. It's a fun way to earn a living. I did it for a decade. But, ask yourself which one of these things you want more and force rank them. Because if, as somebody I know has said, if everything is a priority, then nothing is. You can't just say everything's equally important. You have to pick one of those because you're going to have some decisions to make. If you want to consult, and if you want organizational leadership to listen to you and to involve you in strategic decisions, and I don't mean strategic decisions about whether to use the builder pattern, I mean like actual strategic decisions in your organization, business decisions, how to spend money, who to hire and who to walk out of the building, all that type of stuff that leadership does. If you want a seat at that table, you cannot really be viewed as a laborer. Those don't mesh. And so you have to principally be one or the other. And if your goal is to program, then, do that. I would kind of take the consulting thing for the most part off the table. If your goal, on the other hand, is to start being paid for your expertise and knowledge to be a consultant, you can still write code. The easiest way to do it is something I did for years in leadership roles, which is go home at night and write code, build toy apps in your spare time. Do you? When I was a CIO of a company, I used to go home and build home automation apps. I even did a course about that in my spare time. So there's that. But the other thing, if you really want to have a career and be a consultant, if you want to have a career that still involves programming, you know, I've got kind of a blueprint for that too. Once upon a time, when I had this code-based assessment practice, I would go to organizations and I'd have these, you know, 1 to 3 week engagements with leadership where I would gather a lot of data about their code bases and I would do a write-up and make recommendations and present to boards of directors or leadership about my findings about the code. Now, as you can imagine, I built up a lot more intellectual property and more of a game plan than just going in and kind of randomly looking at files in a code base. In fact, I had a whole systematic, one of those ways of turning code bases into data and robo-analyzing them in a lot of ways in a hurry. Now, as you might imagine, this involved writing some code, but I wasn't getting paid to write code. I was getting paid to create findings and present those findings to boards of directors. It just so happened I was able to create intellectual property and code that made me more efficient at this. So there are ways, if you have a consulting practice, I would think of building kind of an offering ladder, if you will. Think about productized services or even a SaaS you could build that sort of orbits your area of expertise. So in my case, I advise on what organizational leadership should do, but I've got this kind of robo code analyzer. I could put that thing online and write some code, you know, selling it to the masses. I could do example code and teach other people how to do this. There are a lot of ways that you can write code, because if you build a practice, if you become a consultant and you build a practice, you're building a business, and you can make your business more efficient through automation, which is what writing code is. So there will be ways to do it. You're just going to have to get a little bit more creative. But if you truly want to be a consultant, that is, in our current sort of commercial state of affairs, completely incompatible with being somebody who gets paid to write code. The business just will not view you as strategic. You will be a laborer. All right, last question. Hi, Eric. Thank you for your great and a bit cynical book and your blog. It was inspiring to me, and I recently moved to be self-employed. Cool. Also, thanks for the kind words. If for those of you watching who did not submit any of these questions, like, this might seem like I'm flexing, like I'm just picking these out in the order that they came. So I am flattered that so many people had nice things to say in this particular episode. Maybe to balance the scales, I'll go, you know, read the book reviews for Developer Hegemony or somewhere people excoriate me.
What a cheap, lying, no good, rotten, four-flushing, low-life, snake-licking, dirt-eating, inbred, overstuffed, ignorant, blood-sucking dog kid.
Kind of establish some karmic balance there. Can I please ask for your help in moving to proper consulting? I have experience in both engineering, big data, and leadership, startup, HOE, I can't really recall what that means. Head of engineering, I bet. Anyway, my profile, just in case, I will elide that. My goal is to become a consultant in topics of running data engineering, introducing data engineering in startups, etc. But now I mostly get contacted for purely contract work as a well-paid data engineer or tech lead. What do you think? Is there any demand in a more managerial or pure software consulting without writing code for production? I know you wrote about it, but it seems that the main demand is for marketing people or agile consultants. Is pure consulting, finding value, advising on techs, architecture practices in software possible, or is it just a small part of a parcel and the rest is hands-on implementation? The second thing is credibility. How do I build it in my situation? Do you think it makes sense for me to go for one more fulfilling role of CTO of a startup, or can I build consulting experience by volunteering my services? Okay, so this is another one with a fair bit to unpack here. The main questions are, should I take another leadership role in order to become more of a consultant, or can I kind of do it with what I've got? And I've done these things where I have some leadership, but nevertheless, the way that people are contacting me is still in the capacity of kind of a laborer. So what do you do? All right, so why don't I answer maybe the easiest one of these questions as I'm kind of staring at this card first. Is peer consulting possible in software? Yes. The thing is, and this is where I find that most people struggle, it's really hard to go from being a software engineer, say employed, to a freelance software engineer to start becoming a consultant, because a lot of what we learn to do to impress and to sell ourselves when we are full-time software engineers or freelancers is the sort of polar opposite of what you should do as a consultant. And that is where we go out and we kind of try to impress architects with our backgrounds and our skill sets and everything. And we also apply to jobs through either recruiters or application processes, or there are agencies out there like Upwork or TopTal or whatever that kind of mimic those same things. They're just quasi-employment type deals for freelancers. And all of that is how not to be a consultant. So anyone that's approaching you to work through the channels that you're used to being approached through for app dev work or similar types of, data engineering, whatever you are doing, if you're getting reached out to, my grammar is terrible here. If people are reaching out to you through these same channels, they are not under any circumstances looking for consulting. They have already laid out the project. They got their Gantt chart. They got everything they need. They just need to plug in a resource. And you are not going to have an easy time turning that into like, hey, why are you doing this? Let's have a discovery call. Maybe you need some strategy. They're going to say, nope, I really sure don't. All that's taken care of. I just need you to come and sling some code. So is software consulting possible? Yes, but not the way you're probably trying to acquire leads if people are looking for app dev. The thing that you have to be doing here is appealing to buyers. You have to be appealing to leadership with a service that you can offer them or with knowledge that you have that they need. So there's a mention in here of my goal is to become a consultant in topics of running data engineering, introducing data engineering in startups, etc. Now, let me point out something that is utterly critical to making this leap.
This is different. This is important.
A consultant in topics of running data engineering, introducing data engineering in startups. What are you doing there? You are listing activities that you have performed in the past. So if you were to get out your resume, those are probably not even accomplishments. Those are literally your day-to-day job description. I ran data engineering. I introduced data engineering at a startup. There is probably some stuff with relational databases and so on and so forth. But hopefully you see what I'm getting at. Buyers don't care about that. People in organizational leadership don't want a job description of what you did as an individual contributor or even a tech lead or something. They want to know how you can help them. So the very first thing is, instead of presenting something about running data engineering or introducing data engineering, what does data engineering do for me if I'm an organizational leader in IT or outside of it? Why, if I were to have a data engineering department, what would that even do for me? Why would I want that? That's the language you that's the language you need to start speaking in order to have those conversations. So if you are helping organizations establish data engineering departments, what's the return on investment? Who needs that and why? How would they know? How will you make their lives easier? What kind of pain, dream, fix scenario, which is, hey, you have this pain. Wouldn't it be nice not to have that pain? I can help you fix it. You need to start thinking in those terms, and then you need to start talking to those types of buyers. And when it comes to consulting, you need to start learning what they understand and what they don't. So if you want to consult kind of around this set of expertise, you need to really start to listen to them. What do people not know about data engineering? What questions do they have? How can you make their lives easier? What might they want to ask you? And that's when you're going to get into pure consultative situations. Maybe you're there to do retainer advice for somebody who's installing a new data engineering department. Or maybe you're there to provide advice for how to go and hire into that department or something. But you really need to flip it around, think less about your activities and more about who would have an interest in those activities and why, and how you can help them and have conversations with them. And so the last thing there is, do you need to take another job? No. And the reason I'm going to say this is because this is sort of, again, and this is really becoming a theme with my blog and this channel, this is, again, thinking like resume-driven application for stuff. If I just get another CTO role, then people are going to see, 3 years of CTO, and when they want to plug in at a strategic resource, they will call on me. You don't need that. The thing is, you need to be positioning yourself to be giving advice. You need to understand things like the ROI around what you're doing. You need to understand the pains that leaders have, and you need to start speaking their language. And there isn't a series of roles so much that's going to help you do that. It's market research. It's getting out. It's talking to those people and finding ways to help them. So I would absolutely, if you're looking to consult, stay on your own, go off on your own, this type of thing. You don't need different jobs in order to do that. You just need to get in front of your buyers and to speak their language and to understand them. All right, and that's going to do it. I get into these consulting topics and I get a little verbose. So I was shooting for under 20 minutes. Did not get that done, but I hope you forgive me. Hopefully you have been enjoying these. This has been another fun one for me to do. If you liked this video, I would love it if you would give me a like. If you didn't, feel free to give it a thumbs down, whatever you want to do. Your engagement is your business. If you would like to see more of these and get notified when they come out, you can give me a subscribe down below. Click that bell and you will get the notifications. And with that, I am going to thank you as always for watching, and I will catch you next time.